The action scene was perfect. Explosions timed with precision, stunt work flawless, cameras capturing every angle of the chaos. Jason Statham, sweat glistening on his shaved head, executed the complicated fight sequence with the grace of a man, half his age. Directors called him impossible to work with, but they kept calling because he delivered. Every single time. The entire crew held their breath as he nailed the final move, a complicated leap that would have sent a younger man to the hospital. "Cut!" The director's voice echoed across the soundstage. Only then did Jason notice the elderly cameraman operating the B camera, hands slightly trembling as they adjusted the focus. Those hands. He would recognize them anywhere, even 30 years later. Without a word, Jason Statham walked off the set. But why would one of Hollywood's biggest action stars abandon a multi-million-dollar production after spotting an elderly cameraman? The answer stretches back decades, to a time before fame, when a struggling athlete met a filmmaker who changed his life forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. London, in the early 1990s, was a city in transition. The financial boom of the 80s had given way to recession, leaving young people scrambling for opportunity in a landscape increasingly hostile to dreamers. Among them was Jason Statham, a tall, broad-shouldered young man with an intensity in his eyes that seemed at odds with his current occupation, selling counterfeit perfume and jewelry from a suitcase on Oxford Street. "Genuine Cartier, madam, at a fraction of the price," Jason called out to passing shoppers, his voice carrying the distinctive working-class accent of South London. His hands moved with surprising dexterity as he displayed his wares, a skill honed from years as a competitive diver on the British national team. Those days were behind him now. The Olympic dreams faded like old photographs. A cold drizzle began to fall, sending potential customers scurrying for cover. Jason sighed, quickly, packing his merchandise before the rain could damage it. Another meager day of sales. He glanced at his watch, still 2 hours before he needed to be at the nightclub where he worked as a bouncer, his third job that week. "Excuse me," a voice called out. Jason turned to see a middle-aged man approaching, carrying an umbrella and a battered leather satchel. "I've been watching you for a while." Jason immediately tensed, his body language shifting to defensive. "I've got all the proper licenses, mate," he lied smoothly. "If you're trading standards, you can check with the council." The man laughed, a warm sound that seemed genuine. No, nothing like that. My name is Edward Hayes. I teach film at the London Film School." He extended a hand, which Jason shook cautiously. "I couldn't help but notice how you interact with people. There's something authentic about you." "Right," Jason replied, skepticism evident in his tone. He'd heard plenty of lines in his day, especially working the doors at nightclubs. "What's this about, then?" Edward Hayes pulled a card from his pocket. "I'm directing a student film. Small budget, nothing fancy. One of my actors just dropped out and I need someone with presence." His eyes assessed Jason with professional interest. "Ever done any acting?" Jason barked out a laugh. "Do I look like an actor to you?" "Actually, yes," Hayes replied without hesitation. "Film isn't about looking pretty, though that helps with certain roles. It's about authenticity, being believable. You have that rare quality of seeming real." Rain continued to fall, soaking, through Jason's jacket. He should have dismissed this as another wild scheme, another dead end in a city full of them. But something in Hayes's eyes, a genuine passion perhaps, made him pause. "What's the film about, then?" Hayes smiled, sensing an opening. "It's called Street Level, about a young man from a working-class background who gets involved with local gangsters. It's gritty, realistic, not glamorized Hollywood nonsense." "And you want me to play what, the tough guy?" Jason asked, a hint of resignation in his voice. He'd been typecast his entire life. The muscular enforcer. the intimidating. Presence, the lead, Hayes corrected him. A complex character struggling between loyalty to his neighborhood and dreams of something more. He paused, studying Jason's face. Sound familiar? It did, more than Jason cared to admit. His own life had been a series of near misses with trouble, always dancing on the edge of legality while trying to forge a legitimate path forward. The diving career had been his ticket out, until funding cuts and politics had ended that dream. "I can't pay much," Hayes continued, "but it's better than standing in the rain. Film starts shooting next week. 3 weeks of work." Jason glanced, down at his suitcase of knockoff merchandise, then back at Edward Hayes with his passionate eyes and genuine enthusiasm. "I've never acted before." "Everyone starts somewhere," Hayes replied simply. "I've been teaching film for 15 years. I know talent when I see it." He pulled a dog-eared script from his satchel. "Take this. Read it. If you're interested, come to this address tomorrow at 2 p.m. for a proper audition." Jason took the script, wondering if he was being conned somehow. It wouldn't be the first time someone had tried. "Why me? Plenty of drama school graduates looking for work, I imagine." Hayes was already turning to leave, but he paused at the question. "Drama school teaches technique. It can't teach life experience, can't teach hunger." He tapped the script in Jason's hand. "This character needs both. See you tomorrow, Mr. Statham, Jason Statham, Mr. Statham, tomorrow at 2. Hayes nodded, then disappeared into the crowd of umbrellas and raincoats flowing down Oxford Street. Jason stood there for a long moment, the script growing damp in his hands. He almost tossed it in the nearest bin. Almost. Instead, he tucked it carefully into his jacket and continued packing his merchandise, wondering what madness had possessed him to even consider such an outlandish proposition. That night, after his shift at the club ended at 3 a.m., Jason sat in his small bedsit in Earl's Court, the script open before him. The character, Danny Mitchell, was indeed familiar. A young man using his physical prowess to make ends meet while harboring deeper ambitions. There was a raw honesty to the writing that surprised him. No glamorization of violence, no easy answers. "This is mental," he muttered to himself, but he kept reading until dawn began to break over London. By then, he had read the script 3 times and made his decision. The following afternoon found him at the address Hayes had provided, a small converted warehouse in Hackney that served as both classroom and studio for Hayes's film students. The space smelled of dust and creativity, the walls covered with film posters and production stills. Edward Hayes greeted him with evident surprise. "You came. Excellent." He introduced Jason to a small group of students who would form the crew. Earnest, young people with more enthusiasm than equipment. "This is my final year project," Hayes explained. "These students will receive credits, and if the film does well at festivals, it could launch careers." "Including yours?" Jason asked, noting that Hayes himself seemed too experienced to be a student. "I've been teaching for years, but directing is my passion," Hayes admitted. "The school allows faculty to produce 1 project annually. This is mine for this year." The audition was unlike anything Jason had expected. No formal sides to read, no panel of judges. Instead, Hayes simply talked with him, drawing out stories from his life, about growing up in a council flat, about diving competitions, about the street smarts needed to survive in London's informal economy. "Perfect," Hayes declared after an hour of conversation. "You're Danny Mitchell to the core. The role is yours if you want it." Jason hesitated only briefly. His current paths were leading nowhere. At worst, this would be 3 weeks of steady pay. At best, well, he didn't allow himself to think that far ahead. "I'm in," he said simply. What followed was the most intense 3 weeks of Jason's life. Hayes proved to be both a demanding director and a patient teacher. When Jason struggled with dialogue, Hayes would work with him for hours, finding ways to make the words feel natural. When a scene called for vulnerability, something entirely foreign to Jason's carefully constructed tough guy persona, Hayes knew exactly how to draw it out of him. "Everyone thinks acting is about pretending," Hayes told him during a particularly difficult scene. "It's not. It's about finding the truth that already exists within you. The character is already there. You just need to give him permission to emerge." The film was shot guerrilla style on the streets of East London, using natural light and real locations. Jason found himself working 16-hour days, exhausted but exhilarated. For the first time in years, he felt purposeful, engaged. The crew, initially skeptical of this non-actor in their midst, gradually warmed to him as they witnessed his work ethic and willingness to try anything Hayes suggested. On the final day of shooting, Hayes took Jason aside. "You have something special," he said, his voice serious. "A natural screen presence that can't be taught. If you want to pursue this, I can make some introductions." Jason had been waiting for the punchline, the ask, the hidden agenda. It never came. "Why would you do that?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. Hayes smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "Because 30 years ago, someone did it for me. This industry runs on connections, Jason. Talent gets you in the door, but relationships keep you there." He handed Jason a list of names and numbers. "These are former students, colleagues, casting directors. Tell them I sent you. It won't guarantee anything, but it might get you an audition." "I don't know what to say," Jason admitted, staring at the paper as if it might vanish. "Say you'll stay in touch. Let me know how it goes." Hayes clapped him on the shoulder. "And say you'll come to the premiere. Small affair at the school, but still." Jason did attend the premiere, standing awkwardly in a borrowed suit as Street Level played to an audience of students, faculty, and a few industry professionals. The film was raw, imperfect, but undeniably powerful. When it ended, he was shocked to find himself receiving applause, congratulations, questions about his training, none, and his next project, non-existent. Among the attendees was a casting assistant for a music video director named Guy Ritchie, who was preparing to shoot his first feature film. "You've got a look we might be interested in," she told Jason, handing him her card. "Call this number next week." That call led to an audition for Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, which led to a role, which led to Snatch, which led to Hollywood's attention. The trajectory wasn't immediate. There were lean years, small parts, doubts, but the path that began in that converted warehouse in Hackney eventually led to international stardom. Through it all, Jason kept in sporadic touch with Edward Hayes. Christmas cards, occasional phone calls. He sent tickets when one of his early films premiered in London. Hayes always responded warmly, genuinely proud of his former student's success. But as Jason's career accelerated, as Hollywood beckoned, as the demands of fame consumed his time, the communication became less frequent, then stopped altogether. The last time they had spoken was nearly 15 years ago, when Hayes called to congratulate Jason on his role in The Transporter. They had promised to meet for a pint the next time Jason was in London, but schedules never aligned. Life, in its relentless way, moved on. Until today, on a soundstage in London, when those hands, older now, slightly trembling but unmistakable, had appeared behind the camera. The hands that had once guided a nervous street vendor through his first film role, the hands that had opened doors that Jason hadn't even known existed, and without a word, Jason Statham had walked off the set. What the hell was that? Marcus Chen, the director, burst into Jason's trailer without knocking, his face flushed with anger. "We had one more take to get. You can't just walk off my set, Statham." Jason was sitting on the small couch, still in his costume, a torn, blood-stained tactical suit that had taken the costume department weeks to perfect. His expression was unreadable, eyes focused on something distant. "Jason, I'm talking to you." Marcus snapped his fingers in front of the actor's face. "I need 10 minutes. Jason said quietly, his voice controlled but firm. "Then we'll finish the scene." 10 minutes? Do you know what this is costing? Every minute we're delayed costs. I know exactly what it costs, Jason interrupted finally, making eye contact with the director. 10 minutes, please. Something in his tone made Marcus pause. In the 5 weeks they'd been shooting, Jason had been the consummate professional. Always on time, always prepared, never complaining about the grueling action sequences or long hours. This behavior was completely out of character. "Is everything okay?" Marcus asked, his anger giving way to concern. "Yes. No." Jason ran a hand over his head, a rare gesture of uncertainty. "I just saw someone I haven't seen in a very long time. Someone important." Marcus checked his watch, the production schedule never far from his mind. The B camera operator? Hayes? He's just a day player, filling in because Reynolds got food poisoning. "He's not just a day player," Jason replied, an edge entering his voice. "He's the reason I'm sitting here talking to you." Marcus sighed, recognizing that whatever was happening needed to be addressed before they could continue shooting. "Fine. 10 minutes. But then we need to finish this scene. We lose the location tomorrow." After the director left, Jason sat for a long moment, thoughts tumbling through his mind. Edward Hayes, here, working as a replacement camera operator on his film. The wrongness of it struck him like a physical blow. Hayes should be directing films, not operating cameras on someone else's set. He had been brilliant, passionate, with an eye for authenticity that most Hollywood directors lacked. What had happened in the years since they'd lost touch? The Edward Hayes he remembered had been a rising star in British independent cinema, his student film, Street Level, having won several festival awards, leading to funding for 2 feature films that had received critical acclaim if modest box office. Jason had assumed Hayes's career had continued on its upward trajectory, perhaps not to Hollywood blockbuster levels, but certainly to a respectable position in the industry. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. 10 minutes are up, called the assistant director. "Coming," Jason replied automatically, but he didn't move. Another knock, more insistent this time. "Mr. Statham, we really need to get this shot before we lose the light." With a sigh, Jason rose and opened the door. "I need you to find out something for me," he told the young assistant director. "The B camera operator, Edward Hayes. Find out how long he's been with the production, who hired him, and where he's staying." The AD blinked in surprise. "Sir, we really need to—" "Now," Jason said quietly, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "I'll be on set in 2 minutes." True to his word, Jason returned to the set precisely 2 minutes later. His professional mask was firmly back in place as he took his position for the final take of the day. The scene called for him to fight his way through 3 attackers, sustain a wound to his shoulder, and still manage to escape by leaping from a second-story window onto the hood of a car below. It was the kind of physically demanding sequence that had become his trademark. As he prepared, his eyes scanned the set for Hayes, but the elderly man was nowhere to be seen. The B camera was now operated by someone else, a young woman he didn't recognize. "Where's Hayes?" he asked the nearest crew member, a gaffer adjusting a light. "Sent home," the man replied with a shrug. "Director was pretty pissed after you walked off. Blamed the old-timer for distracting you." Jason felt a surge of anger that he quickly suppressed. Hayes had done nothing wrong. This was on him. "Action!" called Marcus, and Jason channeled his conflicting emotions into the scene, performing, with an intensity that left the crew visibly impressed. The stunt coordinator actually applauded when he stuck the landing on the car hood, a notoriously difficult maneuver that many actors would have left to a double. "Cut! Perfect!" Marcus called, his earlier frustration forgotten in the face of a perfect take. "That's a wrap for today, everyone. Jason, that was something else." As the crew began breaking down equipment, the AD approached Jason with a slip of paper. "The information you asked for, Mr. Statham." Jason took it, scanning the hastily scribbled notes. Edward Hayes had been hired that morning as a last-minute replacement, referred by someone in the equipment rental house. He was staying at a modest hotel in Ealing, far from the luxury accommodations provided for the main cast and key crew. There was a phone number, presumably for the hotel. "Thank you," Jason said, pocketing the paper. "One more thing. Did anyone tell Hayes why he was being sent home?" The AD hesitated. "I'm not sure, but I heard production coordinator say something about his hands shaking too much. Said they couldn't risk unsteady footage." The injustice of it hit Jason like a blow. Hayes, a visionary director reduced to camera operation, now dismissed for the tremors of age. It was wrong on so many levels. "I need a car," he said abruptly. "Your driver should be waiting." "Not mine. I need a regular car, something inconspicuous." The AD looked confused but nodded. "I'll see what I can do." 30 minutes later, having showered and changed into civilian clothes, jeans, a black t-shirt, and a leather jacket, Jason slid behind the wheel of a nondescript silver Ford. His own vehicle, a chauffeur-driven Range Rover, was a fixture in London tabloid photos. The last thing he needed was paparazzi following him tonight. The drive to Ealing took longer than expected. London traffic snarled, as always during the evening rush. It gave Jason time to think, to remember. How many years had it been since he'd really thought about Edward Hayes? Too many. Success had a way of making you forget the people who helped you climb the ladder. Or perhaps it wasn't forgetting so much as assuming. Assuming they were doing fine, assuming they didn't need anything from you, assuming your paths had diverged for good reasons. The hotel, when he finally found it, was exactly as modest as he'd expected. Not squalid, but the kind of place that catered to business travelers on tight budgets, families stretching their vacation pounds, and, apparently, film crew members not important enough for the production's main hotel. Jason, parked across the street, suddenly uncertain. What exactly was his plan here? Show up unannounced at Hayes's door and say, "What?" "Sorry, I haven't been in touch for 15 years. Sorry you got fired because of me." The absurdity of his impulsiveness struck him. This wasn't a movie script with conveniently written dialogue. This was real life, messy and complicated. He was about to start the car and leave when the hotel's front door opened, and Edward Hayes emerged. The years had not been kind. The once robust man was now thin, almost gaunt, his hair completely white, and thinning. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone conscious of his own fragility. Even from across the street, Jason could see the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted his coat against the evening chill. Hayes glanced up and down the street before setting off toward the main road, presumably in search of dinner. Without allowing himself to reconsider, Jason got out of the car and followed at a distance. This wasn't the conversation to have in a hotel lobby or room. Better somewhere neutral, public but private enough for honest words. Hayes walked slowly but purposefully, eventually turning into a small pub on a corner. "The Fox and Hound," proclaimed the weathered sign, featuring a faded painting of the namesake. Animals. It was the kind of neighborhood establishment that catered to regulars, not tourists. Exactly the sort of authentic spot Hayes had always preferred when they were filming Street Level all those years ago. Taking a deep breath, Jason pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The pub was dimly lit, with dark wood paneling and low ceilings that had probably been absorbing cigarette smoke for centuries before the smoking ban. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, providing both warmth and ambiance. At this early hour, the place was only half full, mostly older men nursing pints and reading evening papers. Hayes sat alone at a small table in the corner, a half pint of bitter in front of him, studying what appeared to be a script or set of notes. He didn't look up as Jason approached, didn't notice him until Jason was standing directly beside the table. "Is this seat taken?" Jason asked, his voice softer than usual. Hayes looked up, confusion crossing his features before recognition dawned. Good Lord, he murmured. Jason Statham. He gestured to the empty chair. Please, sit down. Jason settled into the chair, suddenly feeling awkward in a way he hadn't experienced since his early audition days. I'm sorry about today, he began. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. Hayes waved away the apology. No need for that. These things happen on sets. Always have. They fired you because of me, Jason persisted. That's not right. A small smile played at the corners of Hayes's mouth. They hired me for 1 day of work, and I got a full day's pay. That's the business. He studied Jason's face for a moment. You look well. Success agrees with you. The simple observation, delivered without bitterness or flattery, was so characteristic of the Hayes that Jason remembered that he felt a rush of nostalgia. It's good to see you, Edward, he said sincerely. Likewise, Hayes replied, taking a sip of his beer, though I must admit I'm surprised you recognized me. It's been quite a while. I'd never forget you, Jason said, then felt embarrassed by the sentiment. He'd never been good with emotional declarations. I mean, you gave me my start. Changed. The course of my life. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. That film does seem to have launched you rather spectacularly. He gestured to the bartender who approached their table. Another round, please. And whatever Mr. Statham is drinking. Just water. For me, Jason said. I'm driving. When the bartender had gone, Hayes leaned forward slightly. So, to what do I owe this unexpected reunion? Surely you didn't track me down to a pub in Ealing just to apologize for a minor incident on set. The direct question caught Jason off guard. What was he doing here? The impulse that had driven him to find Hayes wasn't something he had fully examined. I wanted to know how you're doing, he said finally. It's been too long. Hayes studied him for a moment, his eyes still sharp despite the age evident in the rest of his appearance. I'm doing well enough, he said, but something in his tone suggested otherwise. Still in the business, as you saw today, behind the camera rather than directing these days, but that's how it goes sometimes. That's not how it should have gone for you, Jason said, unable to keep the incredulity from his voice. You were brilliant. Street level was just the beginning. Your features were critically acclaimed. What happened? A shadow crossed Hayes's face, there and gone so quickly that Jason might have imagined it. Life happened, he said simply. Same as it happens to everyone. He accepted his fresh beer from the returning bartender with a nod of thanks. But enough about old history. Tell me about this film you're working on. Looks like another action blockbuster. The deflection was obvious, but Jason allowed it, launching into a description of Retribution, his current project, a high-concept thriller about a former Special Forces operative seeking vengeance for his murdered family. As he spoke, he watched Hayes closely, noting how the older man listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking insightful questions about character motivation or narrative structure. You still think like a director, Jason observed after one particularly astute comment. Hayes shrugged. Once it gets in your blood, it never really leaves, even if the opportunities dry up. Why did they? Jason asked, seizing the opening. The opportunities, I mean. You were on track for a solid career. Hayes took a long drink of his beer, clearly weighing his words. There was a film, he said finally. My third feature, The Invisible Line. Political thriller set against the backdrop of the Northern Ireland peace process. Had some big names attached. Not star level, but respected British actors. Decent budget by UK standards. Jason nodded encouragingly. He vaguely remembered Hayes mentioning this project during one of their last conversations, speaking of it with excitement and anticipation. Production was difficult from the start, Hayes continued. Weather issues, script problems, the usual, headaches. Then, halfway through shooting, my wife, Martha, was diagnosed with cancer. He stated this fact clinically, but Jason could see the old pain in his eyes. Aggressive, fast-moving, The doctors gave her 6 months. I'm so sorry, Jason said softly. I didn't know. Hayes acknowledged this with a small nod. No reason you would. We weren't in regular contact by then, and I've never been one to broadcast my personal troubles. He traced a pattern in the condensation on his glass. I tried to continue directing while taking care of her, but it was impossible. The film fell behind schedule, went over budget. The producers brought in another director to finish it while I took leave to be with Martha. That's understandable, Jason said. Anyone would have done the same. Perhaps, but in this business, perception becomes reality. I became known as the director who couldn't finish his film, who let personal problems interfere with professional obligations. Hayes's voice held no bitterness, only a weary acceptance. Martha lasted 8 months. By the time she passed, The Invisible Line had been released and flopped spectacularly. Critics eviscerated it, rightly so. It was a mess, tonally inconsistent, poorly edited. My name was still on it as director, though I'd had no control over the final cut. Jason winced. In the film industry, a flop could be career-ending, especially for directors without an established track record of commercial success. After that, Hayes continued. The offers simply stopped coming. I pitched projects, of course, used every contact I had, but no one would take the risk. Eventually, I had to find other ways to stay in the industry. Camera work, some editing, occasional teaching gigs. He smiled faintly. Pride is a luxury when you've got 2 children to support on your own. You have children? Jason asked, surprised. Hayes had never mentioned a family during their time working together on street level. Olivia and Daniel, Hayes confirmed. They were 11 and 9 when Martha died. Both grown now, of course. Olivia's a cinematographer, quite talented, works mostly on documentaries. Daniel tried directing for a while but found it too precarious. He's in advertising now, shooting commercials. They followed in your footsteps, Jason observed. For better or worse, Hayes replied with a small laugh. I tried to warn them about the instability of the business, but creativity runs in the blood, I suppose. He glanced at his watch. I should be getting back soon. Early call tomorrow. Another day player gig on a television series. Telling. And preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Jason felt a surge of determination. This was wrong. A man of Hayes's talent shouldn't be scraping by on day player jobs, especially not at his age. Edward, he began carefully, I'd like to help, if you'll let me. I have connections, influence. I could make some calls. No. The word was quiet but firm. Hayes met Jason's gaze directly. I appreciate the thought, truly, but I'm not looking for charity or favors. It wouldn't be charity, Jason protested. It would be putting your talent to proper use. You're a director, not a camera operator. Hayes smiled, a genuine expression that momentarily erased the years from his face. I'm whatever the day's paycheck says I am. That's how this business works, as you well know. He finished his beer and set the glass down with precision. It was good. Seeing you, Jason, I mean that. I'm genuinely happy for your success. As Hayes stood to leave, Jason felt a desperate need to extend the conversation, to find some way to help without offending the older man's pride. At least let me drive you back to your hotel, he offered. Save you the walk. Hayes hesitated, then nodded. That would be kind, thank you. The drive back to the hotel was quiet, both men lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Jason parked but kept the engine running. A tacit acknowledgement that this unexpected reunion was coming to an end. It really was good to see you, he said, feeling the inadequacy of the words. I meant what I said about helping, not charity, just one professional to another. Hayes studied him for a long moment before responding. You were always stubborn, he said finally, a hint of affection in his tone. Very well, if you truly want to help, there is something. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a business card, handing it to Jason. My daughter Olivia is trying to produce her first feature documentary. It's about veteran stunt performers, the unsung heroes of action films, the ones who often suffer career-ending injuries without the safety net that stars have. She's been trying to secure funding for months without success. Jason accepted the card, noting the simple design. Olivia Hayes, cinematographer, followed by a phone number and email address. I'm not asking you to fund it, Hayes added quickly. Just perhaps a meeting, some advice from someone who knows the business side of things. She's brilliant behind the camera but struggling with the financial realities of independent production. I'll call her tomorrow, Jason promised, pocketing the card. And I'd like to see you again if that's all right. Properly catch up. Hayes smiled again, that same genuine expression. I'd like that, though I should warn you, my schedule can be unpredictable. The glamorous life of a day player, you know. They exchanged phone numbers and Hayes got out of the car. Jason watched as he walked into the hotel, noticing again the careful, measured pace, so different from the energetic stride he remembered. On the drive back to his own hotel, a 5-star establishment in Mayfair where the production had housed the principal cast, Jason couldn't shake a sense of wrongness about the entire situation. Edward Hayes, the man who had launched his career, was working day player gigs at an age when he should have been comfortably retired or directing passion projects. Meanwhile, Jason himself commanded 8-figure salaries for films that, if he was honest with himself, often prioritized spectacle over the kind of authentic storytelling Hayes had championed. The inequality of it all left a bitter taste in his mouth. Success in the film industry had always been partly about talent, partly about luck, and partly about connections. Jason had been fortunate in all 3 areas, but seeing Hayes tonight had been a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes could change, how easily talent could be overlooked or forgotten in an industry obsessed with the next big thing. As he pulled into the hotel's private entrance where a valet waited to take his car, Jason made a decision. He would do more than just meet with Olivia Hayes about her documentary. Much more. But first, he needed information. The full story of what had happened to Edward Hayes's career and life in the years they'd been out of touch. The following morning dawned gray and drizzly, typical London weather that matched Jason's contemplative mood. He had 3 hours before he was due back on set, and he intended to use them productively. Seated at the desk in his hotel suite, he opened his laptop and began his research. Edward Hayes's filmography was sparse but impressive. Street Level, the student film that had introduced Jason to acting, had won the jury prize at the Edinburgh Film Festival's Student Showcase and honorable mention at several international festivals. His first proper feature, The Waiting Room, a drama about strangers forming unexpected connections in a hospital over the course of a night, had been critically acclaimed and had even secured limited theatrical distribution in the UK and Europe. His second film, Fault Lines, exploring the tensions in a small Welsh mining community facing colliery closure, had built on that success, earning BAFTA nominations for Best British Film and Best Director. It had seemed at that point that Hayes was on a trajectory toward becoming one of Britain's most respected filmmakers. Then came The Invisible Line, the troubled production Hayes had mentioned. Jason found reviews that confirmed everything. The director had said, critics had panned it as tonally inconsistent, lacking coherent vision, and a promising concept squandered by uneven execution. Few had mentioned the circumstances behind the troubled production. In the public eye, it was simply a failure, and Hayes was responsible. After that, the trail went cold. No more directorial credits, just scattered mentions of camera work, second, unit directing and occasional guest lecturing positions at film schools. It was as if The Invisible Line had erased not just Hayes's future prospects, but also recognition of his past achievements. Jason picked up his phone and dialed a number. From memory. "Bloody hell, is that really you?" came the cheerful response after 2 rings. The great Jason Statham himself. To what do I owe this honor at— A pause. 8 in the bloody morning? Need a favor, Charlie, Jason replied, smiling despite himself. Charlie Parker had been his first agent in London, a brash, shrewd operator who had guided Jason's early career before handing him off to the larger agencies that handled his Hollywood transitions. They had remained friends, with Charlie now representing a new generation of British talent. For you, anything, Charlie replied, unless it involves morning exercise or giving up scotch. Information, Jason clarified, about a director named Edward Hayes. Hayes? Charlie was silent for a moment. Edward Hayes. Did that small film about the Welsh miners, right? Then something about Northern Ireland that tanked. Haven't heard that name in years. That's him. I need to know what happened after The Invisible Line. The real story, not just what's in the press clippings. Charlie's voice turned curious. Any particular reason for this sudden interest in forgotten British directors? He gave me my first break, Jason said simply. Before Guy Ritchie, before any of it. Student film called Street Level. Ah, Charlie said, understanding immediately. The film industry was built on such connections, debts of gratitude that sometimes spanned decades. Give me a few hours. I'll ask around, see what I can find out. Still at the Dorchester? Claridge's this time. Production's putting us up. Fancy. I'll come by this afternoon. Around 4? Perfect. Thanks, Charlie. His next call was to the number on Olivia Hayes's business card. It rang several times before a voicemail picked up, a woman's voice, professional but warm, asking the caller to leave a message. Jason hesitated, then spoke. Ms. Hayes, this is Jason Statham. I met your father last night and he mentioned your documentary project. I'd be interested in discussing it with you. Please call me back at this number at your convenience. He left. His private mobile number then ended the call. With time to spare before his call time on set, Jason decided to dig deeper. He pulled up the website for the London Film School, where Hayes had taught all those years ago. The faculty directory showed no current listing for Edward Hayes, but an archived page from 12 years earlier included his photograph and an impressive biography highlighting his early successes. Next, he searched for information about The Invisible Line. Beyond the reviews, there was little public information about the troubled production. A few industry news items mentioned the director changed mid-production due to personal circumstances, but none elaborated on what those circumstances were. The film's failure had been complete enough that no one had bothered to document its behind-the-scenes drama. His phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number. Hello? Mr. Statham? The voice was female, with the same warm quality he'd heard on the voicemail but now tinged with caution. This is Olivia Hayes. You called about my documentary. Yes, thank you for calling back so quickly. Your father mentioned it last night, and I'm interested in learning more. A pause. I have to say, this is unexpected. How exactly do you know my father? The question carried a hint of protective suspicion that Jason found himself respecting. He directed me in my first film, he explained, a student production called Street Level back in 1993. He essentially started my career. Wait, Olivia said, her tone shifting to surprise. You were in Street Level? You're that Jason Statham? Jason couldn't help but laugh. Is there another one I should know about? No, it's just, Dad used to talk about that film, about finding this natural, talent-selling merchandise on the street. I never made the connection to, well, you, the action star. The same, Jason confirmed. Your father has a good eye for talent, even in unlikely places. He paused. I'd like to meet with you about your project. Today, if possible. Another pause, longer this time. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Statham, but I have to ask, why? Dad hasn't been part of your career for decades. Why the sudden interest? It was a fair question, one that Jason was still answering for himself. I ran into him yesterday, working as a camera operator on my current film. It was unexpected. We talked, and he mentioned your documentary. It sounds like an important story that needs telling. It is, Olivia agreed, her voice warming with passion. These stunt performers risk everything for films, and when they get injured, they're often just discarded. Most audiences never even know their names, despite seeing their work in every action sequence. I know, Jason said quietly. I've worked with many of them over the years. Some of the best people in the business. So you understand why this story matters. I do, and I might be able to help. Connections, maybe even funding. But I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Are you free this evening? Olivia hesitated. I'm actually on location today, shooting interview footage with a retired stuntman in Surrey. I won't be back in London until late. Tomorrow, then. I could do lunch, she offered. There's a cafe near my flat in Brixton. Nothing fancy, but the food's good. Perfect, Jason agreed. Text me the address and I'll have my driver bring me there. Noon work for you? That works, Olivia confirmed. And Mr. Statham, thank you for calling. Whatever your reasons, it means a lot. After ending the call, Jason checked the time. He needed to be on set soon. As he gathered his things, his phone chirped with a text message, an address in Brixton for tomorrow's meeting. He saved it, then headed downstairs where his driver waited to take him to the studio. The day's shooting schedule was grueling, a complex sequence involving multiple fights and a dramatic rescue scene. Jason performed with his usual professionalism, but his mind kept returning to Edward Hayes and the striking disparity in their fortunes. Between takes, he found himself watching the camera operators, the grips, the various crew members who formed the invisible machinery of filmmaking. How many of them harbored directorial ambitions? How many had stories worth telling but lacked the opportunity or connections to tell them? During the lunch break, he approached Marcus Chen, who was reviewing footage on a monitor. The director looked up as Jason approached, nodding and greeting. Yesterday's final take was perfect, Marcus said. The way you landed on that car hood, beautiful. About yesterday, Jason began. I apologize for walking off. It was unprofessional. Marcus waved a dismissive hand. Water under the bridge. You came back and nailed it. That's what matters. The camera operator who was let go, Jason continued. That wasn't right. He did nothing wrong. Marcus's expression shifted slightly, a hint of defensiveness appearing. Production decision, not mine. Anyway, we needed someone with steadier hands. The footage requirements for this sequence? I'd like him rehired, Jason interrupted. For the rest of production. Marcus blinked, clearly surprised by the request. That's not really how it works, Jason. Crew hiring isn't my department and we've already replaced him. The new operator's working out fine. It's important to me, Jason persisted, keeping his voice even. He's an old friend, and I owe him. I don't ask for many favors on set, Marcus. This was true. Unlike many stars of his caliber, Jason rarely made special requests or demands during production. No special foods in his trailer, no entourage to accommodate, no script rewrites to suit his ego. He showed up, did the work, and delivered what was needed. Marcus sighed. I'll talk to production. No promises, but I'll see what I can do. Thank you. By the end of the day, Jason received word that Edward Hayes had been rehired, not as a camera operator, but as a second unit director for some of the less complex action sequences, a position that carried more prestige and better pay. Jason was satisfied with this compromise, though he hadn't had a chance to see Hayes on set that day. As he was leaving the studio, his phone rang again. Charlie Parker. I've got your information, Charlie said without preamble. Can I come by now? I'm just leaving set. Give me 40 minutes to get back to the hotel. Charlie was waiting in the lobby when Jason arrived, looking much as he always had. slightly rumpled suit, thinning hair stubbornly combed over, eyes sharp and assessing behind horn-rimmed glasses. They embraced briefly, then headed up to Jason's. "Sweet. Drink," Jason offered, gesturing to the well-stocked minibar. "Is the Pope Catholic?" Charlie replied, helping himself to a miniature scotch. "So, Edward Hayes." He settled into an armchair, sipping his drink. "Interesting story there. A sad one, too." "Tell me." Charlie pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open. After the invisible line tanked, Hayes was essentially blacklisted. Not officially, mind you, but in that quiet way the industry has. No one would finance his projects. His agent dropped him. Standard treatment for a director who goes over budget and delivers a flop. But the circumstances, his wife's illness, don't matter in this business, as you well know, Charlie interrupted. Results are all anyone cares about. But there's more to the story. The production company, Meridian Films, was already in financial trouble when The Invisible Line went over budget. They needed a scapegoat, and Hayes was convenient. They actively spread word that he was difficult, unreliable. "That's bollocks," Jason said sharply. "Hayes is the most professional director I've ever worked with." Charlie shrugged. "Maybe so, but perception becomes reality in this town. Anyway, after his wife died, Hayes had 2 kids to support and a mortgage to pay. Took whatever work he could get. Camera operator, second unit, even crew jobs when necessary. Tried to get back into directing with smaller projects, but the Meridian executives made sure those doors stayed closed." "Who owns Meridian Films now?" Jason asked, an edge entering his voice. Charlie gave him a knowing look. "Thought you might ask that." Meridian itself went under about a year after The Invisible Line. But the executives who ran it landed on their feet, as they always do. The main player was Sarah Winters. She's an executive at Global Scope Pictures now, one of their senior VPs for European production. Jason recognized the name immediately. Global Scope was one of Hollywood's major studios, responsible for several of his own films, including the current production. And she's the one who blackballed Hayes? According to my sources, yes. Made it her personal mission to ensure he never directed again. Word is, she blamed him entirely for Meridian's collapse, though from what I gathered, the company was already swimming in debt before The Invisible Line even started production. Jason's jaw tightened. Nice of her to destroy a man's career to cover her own mistakes. "That's the business we've chosen," Charlie replied with a cynical smile, quoting The Godfather. He finished his scotch. "There's something else you should know. Hayes has Parkinson's disease. Early stages, but that's why his hands shake. Diagnosed about 5 years ago." The information hit Jason like a physical blow. Does he have proper medical care? Insurance? Doubtful. Freelance crew work rarely comes with benefits, and the British film industry charity can only help so much. His daughter's been supporting him partially, from what I understand. Jason nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. Olivia's documentary wasn't just a passion project. It was likely also a way to establish herself professionally, to create financial stability for her family. "Thanks, Charlie. This helps." Charlie studied him for a moment. "You're planning something, aren't you? I know that look." Jason smiled slightly. "Just repaying an old debt." After Charlie left, Jason spent the evening making calls to various contacts, producers, directors, financiers, former co-stars. By the time he went to bed, he had the beginnings of a plan forming in his mind. Edward Hayes deserved justice. But more than that, he deserved a chance to tell stories again. And Jason Statham, it turned out, had accumulated enough influence over the years to potentially make that happen. The next morning, he arrived at the set early, hoping to catch Hayes before shooting began. He found the older man in the second unit area, reviewing shot lists with a small team. "Edward," Jason called, approaching the group. Several crew members did double takes at seeing the film's star in their workspace. Hayes looked up, surprise. evident on his face. "Jason, good morning. Mind if I borrow you for a moment?" Hayes nodded to his team to continue without him and joined Jason in a quieter corner of the soundstage. "I should thank you," he said without preamble. "I assume the sudden promotion to second unit director has something to do with you." "Just setting things right," Jason replied. "You should never have been relegated to camera operation in the first place." Hayes gave him a measured look. "While I appreciate the sentiment and the better paycheck, I don't need charity, Jason." "It's not charity to put the right person in the right job," Jason countered. "You're overqualified for what they had you doing." Before Hayes could respond, a production assistant approached them. "Mr. Statham, they're ready for you in makeup." Jason nodded acknowledgement. "I'm meeting your daughter for lunch today," he told Hayes, "to discuss her documentary." A complicated expression crossed Hayes's face, gratitude mixed with what might have been embarrassment. "You don't need to do that, either." "I want to," Jason insisted. "Her project sounds important, and I may have some ideas that could help both of you." He clapped Hayes gently on the shoulder. "We'll talk more later. I want to hear about these grandchildren you mentioned." As he walked away, Jason could feel Hayes watching him, likely torn between pride and uncertainty. It was a delicate situation. How to help a man who had spent decades being fiercely independent, whose pride was perhaps his last intact possession after life, and the industry had taken so much else. The morning's shooting went smoothly, and by noon, Jason was in his car heading toward Brixton. The address Olivia had provided led to a small, unassuming cafe on a side street, the kind of local establishment that hadn't yet fallen victim to gentrification. As he entered, he immediately spotted a woman who could only be Hayes's daughter, the same thoughtful eyes, the same observant expression. Olivia Hayes was in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, dressed in the universal uniform of film crew, jeans, boots, and a well-worn jacket with multiple pockets. She was nursing a cup of tea and reviewing something on a tablet when Jason approached her table. "Ms. Hayes?" he said, extending his hand. "Jason Statham." She stood to shake his hand, her grip firm and professional. "Mr. Statham, thank you for coming all the way to Brixton." "Jason, please," he corrected, taking the seat across from her. "And it's no trouble. London traffic is London traffic, regardless of destination." A waitress approached and they both ordered. A simple sandwich for Jason, soup for Olivia. When they were alone again, Olivia got straight to business. "I brought some materials about the documentary," she said, turning her tablet toward him. "It's called The Fall Guys, focusing on stunt performers who suffered career-ending injuries during productions from the 1970s through today." Jason reviewed the presentation she had prepared. Interview clips, photographs, statistics about injuries and the lack of long-term support for injured performers. It was professionally assembled and genuinely moving. "This is good," he said sincerely. "Really good? How far along are you?" "About halfway through principal photography," Olivia replied, a hint of professional pride in her voice. "I've interviewed 15 former stunt performers so far, with another 10 committed. The challenge has been funding to complete production and secure proper post-production resources." Jason nodded, understanding the limitations of independent documentary filmmaking. "What's your total budget?" Olivia named a figure that would have been considered modest for a feature film but substantial for an independent documentary. "I've secured about 60% through grants and private investors, but the remainder has been elusive. Without it, I can't complete the project properly." Their food arrived and they ate as Olivia continued explaining her vision for the film. Not just documenting the physical toll of stunt work, but exploring the psychological impact of building a career on physical prowess, then losing it suddenly through injury. "These men and women are the unsung heroes of action films," she said passionately. "Stars get the glory and the paychecks, but stunt performers take the real risks. When they get hurt, they're often forgotten." "I know," Jason agreed quietly. "I've worked with many of them over the years. lost a few friends to bad accidents. Exactly, Olivia said, leaning forward slightly. You understand this world better than most. That's why your involvement, even just your endorsement, could make a real difference. Jason considered her for a moment, impressed by her passion and professionalism. She had clearly inherited her father's eye for important stories and the determination to tell them. I'll do more than endorse it, he said decisively. I'll fund the remaining 40%. Olivia's eyes widened. What? Just like that? Just like that, Jason confirmed, with one condition. Which is, your father directs. Olivia sat back, clearly stunned by the proposal. My father? But this is a documentary, not a feature film, and he hasn't directed in years. Doesn't matter, Jason replied. Edward Hayes understands authentic storytelling better than anyone I've ever worked with, and from what I've seen of your footage, authenticity is exactly what this project needs. Olivia's expression turned thoughtful. Dad has been helping me with the interviews, offering advice on framing and questions. He's got a natural rapport with the subjects. She hesitated. But there's something you should know. He has early-stage Parkinson's. Some days are better than others. That's part of why he's been working less visible jobs. I know about the Parkinson's, Jason said gently. Charlie Parker told me. Olivia's eyes narrowed slightly. You've been investigating my father? Getting reacquainted, Jason corrected. It's been many years, and much has changed. He leaned forward. I also know about Sarah Winters and what happened with the invisible line. Comprehension dawned on Olivia's face. So that's what this is about. You're trying to right some perceived wrong from the past. Partly, Jason admitted, but it's more than that. Your father helped me when no one else would take a chance on me. Beyond that, he's a brilliant director whose career was derailed by circumstances beyond his control. This project could showcase that brilliance again, while telling an important story about people who deserve recognition. Olivia took a sip of her tea, processing this. And if he refuses, Dad's pride is substantial. Then I'll still fund your documentary, Jason said without hesitation. But I'd like you to at least present the option to him. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll talk to him, but I'm not making any promises about his response. Fair enough. Jason pulled out his phone. Give me your bank details and I'll have the first installment transferred this afternoon. Olivia looked startled. Don't you want contracts drawn up? Some kind of formal agreement? Jason smiled slightly. My lawyers will handle that part, but I've found that in this business, sometimes you need to demonstrate good faith up front. The money comes first, then the paperwork. As they finished their meal, Jason found himself genuinely impressed by Olivia Hayes. She had her father's passion for storytelling and authentic voices, combined with a pragmatic approach to the business side of filmmaking that Edward had perhaps lacked. If her documentary was as good as the sample footage suggested, it could make a significant impact. There's one more thing, Jason said as they prepared to leave. I'd like to appear in the documentary, if you think it would help. Talk about the stunt performers I've worked with, the risks they take. Olivia's expression brightened. That would be incredible. Your name alone would help secure distribution deals. Then it's settled. They shook hands again, this time more warmly. I look forward to seeing what you and your father create together. As Jason drove back to the set, he felt a sense of satisfaction. The funding would ensure Olivia's documentary would be completed properly, and the opportunity to direct might give Edward Hayes something he'd been missing for too long: creative purpose and professional respect. It wasn't charity, it was investment, in talent, both established and emerging. But there was one more piece of unfinished business. Sarah Winters, the executive who had deliberately sabotaged Hayes's career to save her own. Jason wasn't naive enough to think that one successful documentary would undo years of industry blackballing. For Hayes to truly have a chance at directing features again, Winter's influence needed to be neutralized. And as it happened, Global Scope Pictures, where Winters now worked, was co-producing Jason's current film, which meant she was technically one of his bosses on this project. It was time to use the star power and influence he had accumulated over the years for something more meaningful than trailer size or billing position. He made a call to his agent in Los Angeles, where it was still the middle of the night. "This better be important," his agent grumbled upon answering. "Need you to set up a meeting," Jason said without preamble. "Sarah Winters at Global Scope. Today, if possible." "The Europe VP? Why?" "Personal matter. Important enough to wake you at 3 a.m. A sigh came through the phone. "I'll see what I can do, but you're currently shooting their $100 million action franchise. Try not to piss them off, yeah?" "No promises," Jason replied, ending the call as he arrived back at the studio. The afternoon's shooting schedule involved a complex motorcycle chase through London streets, with Jason performing many of his own stunts alongside professional riders. The physicality of the work helped channel his growing anger about Hayes' situation. The injustice of a talented director reduced to day player work while those who had wronged him thrived. Between setups, his agent called back. "You're in luck. Winters is actually in London this week, reviewing European productions. She can see you at 6 p.m. at her hotel." "Which is?" "The Savoy, Suite 5112. I'll be there." The rest of the day passed in a blur of action sequences and technical discussions. At 5:30, Jason left the set, changed into a simple but expensive suit, and headed to the Savoy. No driver this time. He wanted the privacy of his own car for the conversation that was to come. The hotel staff recognized him immediately, of course, but maintained the professional discretion for which the Savoy was famous, simply directing him to the elevators with minimal fuss. He found Suite 512 and knocked firmly. The woman who opened the door was exactly as he had expected, expensively dressed, perfectly coiffed, with the polished smile of an executive accustomed to managing talent. Sarah Winters appeared to be in her late 50s, though extensive cosmetic work made her age difficult to determine precisely. "Mr. Statham," she greeted him warmly, extending a manicured hand. "What an unexpected pleasure. Please, come in." The suite was spacious and elegant, with views overlooking the Thames. A laptop and several scripts were spread across a desk, evidence of actual work rather than just a luxury stay. "Can I offer you a drink?" Winters asked, gesturing to a well-stocked bar cart. "No, thank you," Jason replied, remaining standing. "This won't take long." Winter's smile faltered slightly at his tone. "Well then, what can I do for Hollywood's favorite action star? I'm assuming this isn't about retribution. All the reports I've received indicate shooting is proceeding beautifully." "This is about Edward Hayes," Jason said without preamble. The change in Winter's expression was subtle but unmistakable. A momentary widening of the eyes, a slight tensing of her smile. "Edward Hayes? I'm not familiar with—" "Don't," Jason interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. "Don't insult both of us by pretending you don't know who he is." Winters assessed him for a moment. Then her demeanor shifted from warm hospitality to cool professionalism. "Very well. I knew Edward Hayes many years ago, yes. He directed a film for Meridian Films, where I was an executive. It was not a positive experience, I'm afraid. Because his wife was dying of cancer, and he chose to be with her rather than finish your film." Winter's expression hardened further. "Because he made commitments he couldn't keep, Mr. Statham. This is a business, not a charity. When directors walk away from productions, investors lose millions. And when executives spread lies about directors to cover their own financial mismanagement, careers are destroyed," Jason countered. "Meridian was already failing before The Invisible Line went into production. Hayes was your scapegoat." Winters moved to the bar cart and poured herself a generous measure of scotch. You seem remarkably well informed about ancient industry. History, Mr. Statham. May I ask why this concerns you now, all these years later? Hayes gave me my first acting role when no one else would look twice at me, Jason said simply. He saw potential where others didn't. I owe him. How touching, Winters replied, her tone making it clear she found it anything but. However, Edward Hayes made his own choices. If his career suffered as a result, that's hardly my responsibility. Jason studied her for a moment. The defensive posture, the dismissive attitude. This was not a woman who would be moved by appeals to fairness or decency. Let me be clear, he said, his voice dropping to the quiet, intense tone that had become his trademark in films. For years, you've used your influence to keep a talented director from working. That ends now. Winter's laugh was sharp and dismissive. And how exactly do you intend to make that happen? This isn't one of your action films, Mr. Statham. You can't simply punch your way to a happy ending. No, Jason agreed, but I can make certain choices about who I work with in the future. Global Scope has 3 of my films in development, with combined budgets of over $500 million. Films that are greenlit largely because my name is attached. The implied threat hung in the air between them. Winter's expression remained composed, but Jason noted the slight tightening of her grip on her glass. Are you threatening to walk away from contracted projects, Mr. Statham? Because our legal department would find that quite interesting. Not at all, Jason replied smoothly. I'm simply informing you of my new policy regarding projects I choose to participate in. Going forward, any film I consider must have no involvement from executives with a history of blackballing talented directors for personal reasons. He paused meaningfully. Specifically, you. Winter's veneer of professionalism cracked slightly. That's absurd. You can't dictate which executives work on your films. Actually, I can, Jason countered. It's a standard clause in my contracts. Approval over key production personnel. My agents have been quite insistent about it over the years. This wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough to be believable. Until now, I've never exercised that option. But I'm prepared to start. He let that sink in before continuing. Alternatively, you could demonstrate that your past actions regarding Edward Hayes were perhaps misguided, that you recognize his talent and support his return to directing. Winters set her glass down carefully. What exactly are you asking for? 2 things, Jason said, holding up one finger. First, you publicly acknowledge that Hayes was not responsible for the Invisible Line's failure or Meridian's collapse. A statement to Variety or The Hollywood Reporter should suffice. He raised a second finger. Second, you greenlight a modest feature film for Hayes to direct. Nothing extravagant. £5 million budget, British production, small but meaningful. Idiot. Can't be serious, Winters scoffed. Global Scope doesn't make £5 million British indies. They do now, Jason replied calmly. Consider it an investment in your continued relationship with me and my production company. Winters studied him for a long moment, clearly calculating costs and benefits. And if I refuse? Then I'll be forced to reconsider my involvement in the 3 projects currently in development, and I'll need to explain to the studios, my fellow actors, and the press exactly why I'm doing so. Jason kept his voice matter-of-fact, not threatening. I should mention that several of your colleagues at other studios have already expressed interest in working with Hayes after learning of his situation. Word travels fast in this industry, as you well know. This last part was a complete fabrication, but delivered with enough confidence to be credible. Winter's expression confirmed that the bluff had landed effectively. You would damage your own career to help someone you worked with briefly 30 years ago? She asked, genuine confusion in her voice. I wouldn't be damaging anything, Jason replied. My last 5 films have opened at #1 worldwide. There will always be studios willing to work with me." He stepped closer, his voice softening slightly. "This isn't personal, Ms. Winters. It's about setting right a professional wrong. Hayes deserves another chance. You have the power to give it to him." Winters was silent for several seconds, visibly processing her options. Finally, she sighed. "I'll need to discuss this with the board. We don't typically approve projects based on personal requests, even from valuable talent." "Of course," Jason agreed reasonably. "I understand corporate protocols, but I'm confident you'll be able to persuade them of the business logic." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I should mention that Hayes is currently directing a documentary about stunt performers, the unsung heroes of action films. It's generating quite a bit of industry buzz already." This, too, was fiction, but useful fiction. Creating the perception of renewed interest in Hayes's work would make Winters' eventual discovery of his talent seem less like capitulation and more like shrewd business. "Is he?" Winters said neutrally. "I wasn't aware." "You'll be receiving more information about it soon," Jason assured her. "I look forward to hearing the board's decision by the end of the week. Good evening, Ms. Winters." As he left the suite, Jason felt a grim satisfaction. The meeting had gone much as he had expected. Sarah Winters was a survivor in a cutthroat industry. She would calculate her options and choose the path of least resistance. And he had just made supporting Edward Hayes considerably easier than opposing him. The following morning, Jason arrived on set to find Edward Hayes in animated discussion with several stunt performers, gesturing expressively as he described a shot sequence. The older man looked more alive than Jason had seen him yet, his expertise and passion evident in every word. "Edward," Jason called, approaching the group. "Got a minute?" Hayes excused himself from the stunt team and joined Jason. "Good morning. I hear you had lunch with Olivia yesterday." "I did," Jason confirmed. "She's very talented. The documentary looks promising." Hayes nodded, a flicker of pride crossing his features. "She has a good eye. Better than mine was at her age." She mentioned discussing a directing opportunity with you, Jason said carefully, watching Hayes's reaction. Hayes's face stiffened, the pride fading into something harder to read. "She told you that, did she?" Jason nodded. "Yeah, she said it might be the right time for you both. But it's not just about Olivia, is it?" Hayes didn't respond right away. He stood, walking slowly to the edge of the soundstage where the shadows were thicker and the set lights didn't quite reach. Jason followed but didn't push. It was Olivia's voice he heard in his head now. Calm, resolute. "My father won't admit it, but there's something more, something he's been carrying for years." After a moment of silence, Hayes exhaled through his nose. "Before my wife died, I was finishing a script," Hayes said quietly. "My best work. A film about grief, hope, and starting again. She helped me shape it. We were going to direct it together. First as co-directors, then she'd take the reins. It was her story, as much as mine." Jason furrowed his brow. "You never made it." Hayes gave a dry chuckle. "No. After she died, I couldn't even look at it. I buried it. Literally. Put the hard drive in a box and hid it in our attic. Didn't want Olivia or Daniel finding it. Didn't want anyone to see what I lost." Jason stood quietly, letting the confession settle between them. "But Olivia found it, didn't she?" Jason said. Hayes looked up, eyes narrowed with both pain and reluctant pride. "She did, about a year ago. Read every word. Said it was the best thing I ever wrote. She wants to make it. Said she wants me to direct it with her." Jason's eyes widened. "That's incredible." Hayes shook his head. "It's not. Because I said no." "Why?" Jason's voice was rough now. "Because it's not mine anymore. It belongs to someone who's gone." Hayes turned, his voice breaking slightly. "Because if I try to direct it and fail, it'll be like losing her. Again." Jason stepped forward, putting a hand on his shoulder. Or maybe it's how you find her again. But before Hayes could respond, Olivia's voice echoed from behind them. There's something else he's not telling you. Both men turned. Olivia stood just inside the loading dock door, her expression unreadable. In her hands, she held a folder, weathered, thick, stuffed with notes and yellowed storyboards. I wasn't going to show you this unless you were ready, she said to her father. But I think he deserves to know. She handed the folder to Jason. Inside were dozens of names, crew members, cast, even donors, attached to an unfinished film project called The Last Light. Jason's breath caught as he flipped through it. It wasn't just Hayes's film. It had once been his, too. His name was on the list. What is this? You don't remember? Olivia asked softly. Jason stared at the script cover page. And then, like a dam breaking, it came back. Before he'd ever landed a major film, Hayes had approached him about a low-budget passion project, a war film based on Hayes's father. Jason had auditioned, raw, nervous, and landed a minor role. He'd spent weeks rehearsing, filming, before the project had been abandoned when Hayes's wife fell ill. Jason looked up, stunned. I always thought it just folded. I didn't know it was this. Hayes's jaw tightened. I never told anyone. After she died, I burned out the funding contacts, lost people's trust. That was it. Dream over. But you saved it, Jason whispered, holding the folder. I tried to, never had the heart to finish. Jason looked between the two of them, father and daughter, years of pain and silence bundled up in one dusty box of dreams. And then, a plan clicked in his mind, like a film reel locking into place. We're not just going to finish it, he said. We're going to make it right, all of it. Olivia's eyes filled with cautious hope. Hayes just stared. Let me produce it, Jason said. Quietly, if that's what it takes. But this movie, your movie, it deserves to live. Hayes looked away, torn, and Olivia added softly, let Mom live through it, too. Hayes closed his eyes and nodded. The smell of brewing coffee drifted through the converted studio space as Olivia scrolled through draft emails on her cracked phone screen. She was editing a funding proposal for a short documentary, a pitch she'd abandoned months ago, when her father's voice broke the silence. They're really doing it, Edward Hayes murmured, eyes fixed on the buzzing screen of his daughter's laptop. A crowdfunding page displayed the growing number, 83,762 orders, and climbing, raised by a coalition of industry veterans, students, and fans, mobilized overnight after Jason Statham had gone public. The viral video of Jason walking off set followed by a heartfelt message posted to his millions of followers had turned an act of quiet defiance into something enormous. In the video, Jason had said, 30 years ago, a man gave me a chance. No spotlight, no paycheck, just belief. That man was Edward Hayes, and it's time the world knew his name. Edward sat down slowly at the edge of the couch, his shoulders visibly weighed down. Olivia could see it, the storm of emotions in his eyes. Gratitude, guilt, fear. They want to screen second chances at the BFI South Bank, Olivia said, clicking through to an email from a curator. A retrospective. They're calling it one of the most overlooked British debuts of the 90s. Edward gave a dry chuckle. Overlooked is generous. But now it's not, because someone told the world to look again. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned toward the window watching raindrops race down the glass. Why now, Liv? Why any of this? Olivia hesitated. Because Jason never forgot. Because maybe people are finally ready to listen. There was a knock at the door. When she opened it, Marcus Chen stood there with a strange, humble awkwardness. Behind him, Thomas Reed clutched a stack of production folders. Mr. Hayes, Marcus said, entering slowly. We have a proposal. 2 hours later, the living room had transformed into a makeshift war room. folders were spread across the floor. The television played back clips of Hayes's old student films, grainy but emotionally rich. Jason stood in the center, sleeves rolled, posture tense. "So here's the plan," he said. "We pause the current shoot for 2 weeks. I'll take the financial penalty, not the crew. We use those weeks to make the Brighton job, Hayes's script directed by him, backed by real names, real money. Not a favor, a spotlight." Edward, seated across from him, narrowed his eyes. "And you think studios will allow this? Just step aside and let some washed-up relic—" "Don't," Jason interrupted. "Don't call yourself that. You wrote a hell of a story. You know it. We all do." Thomas stepped forward, beaming. "And I've got students ready to work unpaid, alumni offering equipment, even a soundstage." Marcus added, "I've already told the producers I'm supporting this. I owe you, Hayes. Your student film Blood in Camden is what made me want to direct." Sarah Winters appeared on the screen via video call. "You've created a PR tsunami, Jason. The studio doesn't love it, but they're rolling with it. For now, if Hayes can deliver something authentic, we've got a short theatrical run, maybe awards buzz." Edward looked between them all, overwhelmed. "You're all serious," Jason nodded. "Only question is, are you?" There was silence, the kind of silence that carried the weight of 30 years, of lost chances, of grief and pride. Then Edward rose, slowly, with effort. He picked up the battered Brighton job script, ran a hand over its dog-eared pages, and said, "Then let's make a film." The production schedule was brutal. The resources, scarce but passionate, and the stakes, impossibly high. Jason had never felt more alive on set. He wasn't playing a stylized anti-hero anymore. He was playing a broken man seeking redemption, a former con man trying to right his past by solving a cold case in Brighton's underworld. Hayes had written the role, for a younger man, but they tweaked it. Age became a strength, regret a narrative fuel. Olivia served as assistant director. Her notes were sharp, efficient, infused with the instincts of someone who'd sacrificed too long to doubt herself now. Even Marcus deferred to her with respect. Daniel, watching quietly at first, joined as an on-set photographer, capturing candid moments that would later flood social media. There were moments Hayes faltered. His confidence wavered after a long take didn't land, or when a lighting setup malfunctioned and cost them hours. But then Jason would step in, not as a star, but as a student again. "You told me on our first shoot that I couldn't fake truth," Jason said one night, "and I never forgot it. Neither should you." By the end of the first week, the crew was working like a single organism. Rebecca visited set and brought pastries for everyone. Her quiet warmth grounded Jason when the pressure surged. One night, he confided in her, "I'm scared, Bex. Not of failure, of getting it right, of what that'll mean for him." Rebecca smiled gently. "Then maybe that's exactly what he needs. Not saving, just seeing." Word spread fast. The Brighton job became the underground sensation of the London indie scene before a frame was finished. Film students camped outside the set. Critics whispered about a career-defining return. Even Guy Ritchie tweeted his support. About time the world remembered who taught Jason Statham how to act. Hayes was the truth. But not all was calm. One night, Edward stood alone in the editing bay, watching a raw cut of a pivotal scene. Jason's monologue, a confession of past sins to a victim's sister, was unguarded, raw. The words echoed a grief that wasn't just the characters. Hayes stopped the footage, closed his eyes. "Still with me, Dad?" came a voice. He turned to find Daniel standing in the doorway, arms crossed. Edward tried to smile. "This scene, it feels like you, like your brother, like your mother." Daniel walked in, pulling up a chair beside him. "Then it's real." They watched together in silence for a while. Daniel finally said, "You know, I used to hate that you gave everything to your films. I thought it meant you gave less to us." Edward looked down. "I did." "No," Daniel replied. "You gave what you could, and I didn't get it until I watched you direct again. You're not just telling stories, Dad. You're trying to pass something on." Edward's eyes welled with unspoken weight. Daniel stood. "Finish it. Not for them. For you. For us." On the final day of filming, the cast and crew assembled for one last scene. The characters' final walk into the sea, symbolic and wordless. They filmed at dawn, chasing that brief golden hour light. The wind tore at the coats, the waves crashed in rhythm, and Jason stood knee-deep in the freezing water, motionless, resolute. Edward called, "Cut." Silence followed, then applause, not just polite clapping, but the kind of ovation that signified something sacred. A resurrection. Jason emerged from the water, shivering but smiling. Olivia wrapped a towel around him. "We got it," Edward nodded slowly. "We got it." And then he looked at his daughter, his producer, his right hand, his anchor. "You did this," he whispered. She smiled through tears. "No, we did." The editing suite was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of an analog clock, a relic from Edward's teaching days. The final cut of the Brighton job sat complete on the hard drive. 97 minutes of bruised beauty, pain and redemption carved from time, talent, and sheer defiance. Olivia leaned back in her chair. "So, that's it." Edward exhaled, rubbing his face. "We've got a film." They looked at each other. It was more than that. They'd built a reckoning. Then Olivia's phone lit up. A message from Sarah Winters. Screening confirmed. London Film Festival. Gala premiere. 6 days. 6 days. The buzz built like a gathering storm. Variety published an exclusive. Jason Statham ditches franchise for passion project with forgotten mentor. Empire ran a retrospective. The lost films of Edward Hayes. Visionary or vanished. BBC Arts scheduled an interview with Edward, and The Guardian confirmed a Sunday spread titled "The Director Who Almost Was." The film community took sides. Some questioned the legitimacy. Was this real art or just celebrity rescue? Others, especially students and indie veterans, hailed it as the start of a new wave. Older voices, previously discarded, finally getting the mic back. Edward watched it all from his flat, stunned by the sudden fame. Olivia urged caution. "You've got allies now, Dad, but that means you've also got eyes on you. Some people want to see you fly. Others want to watch you fall." Jason texted him daily. Check-ins, encouragement, the odd joke to keep things human. Edward appreciated it, but there were cracks behind Jason's charm, subtle tremors in his tone. Something wasn't sitting right. 2 nights before the premiere, Edward stood on Waterloo Bridge, watching the lights ripple across the Thames. He used to walk here during his teaching days, thinking up scenes that never left his notebooks. Footsteps approached. Jason joined him, hands deep in his coat pockets. He didn't speak right away. Edward said, "You all right?" Jason hesitated. "No, I lied to you." The words hit like cold water. I didn't quit the action film just for you," Jason continued. "There's a clause in my contract. If I don't return in time, they can sue for damages. Massive ones. Tens of millions." Edward turned to him slowly. "So, why risk it?" "Because I couldn't not risk it." Jason's voice trembled. "Because your work changed me. Because I'm tired of being just a product." I wanted to mean something again. Edward stared at him, heart heavy. "They'll come for you." Jason nodded. "Let them." I've had my moment. Maybe it's time I use it to give someone else theirs." A silence stretched between them. Then Edward placed a hand on Jason's shoulder. "Thank you, but I don't want a martyr. I want a friend." Jason smiled weakly. "Then I'm still in." The BFI South Bank pulsed with anticipation. A mix of velvet tuxedos, sneakers, and activist badges packed the venue. Cameramen fought for angles, journalists whispered and speculated. A red carpet extended into the theater like a bridge to judgment. Edward arrived last, not by design, just habit. Olivia held his arm as they walked through the chaos. Cheers erupted, not for the celebrity, for the symbol. Edward Hayes, forgotten, flawed, and now suddenly central. Inside, as the lights dimmed and the projector hummed to life, Edward sat in the back row, heart thudding. He didn't watch the screen. He watched the audience. Their stillness, their gasps, their tears. By the final scene, Jason's quiet walk into the sea, there wasn't a single cough or shuffle, just breath held in collective reverence. The credits rolled, then silence, then an explosion of applause. Not forced, not polite, raw. Jason hugged him in the aisle. Olivia cried openly. Backstage, a BFI rep handed Edward a champagne glass. "You've made a bit of history tonight." He looked down at the bubbling gold. "I was just telling the truth." The Brighton job landed distribution with A24 within a week. The Oscars buzz began immediately. Best Original Screenplay, Best Director, and even a Best Actor nod for Jason. BAFTA offered a Lifetime Achievement Award for Edward Hayes. Students sent him handwritten letters, apologies, congratulations, tributes. But not all news was bright. The studio behind Jason's abandoned blockbuster sued him for breach of contract. Tabloids salivated over the drama. Edward called Jason. "I'll talk to them. Tell them it was my fault." Jason laughed. "And ruin your second act? No way. Let them come. I've got good lawyers, and now I've got a good film." Still, the EU tension loomed. It was Olivia who found the solution. She called in every favor, mobilized every ally, and within days, a public campaign formed. It took stand with Statham. Industry names lent support. Fans posted tribute clips from the Brighton job. Donations flooded a legal defense fund. The pressure worked. The studio settled out of court for a reduced penalty. Jason, ever the showman, held a press conference. "I'd walked away from one movie to make the one that mattered," he said. "And I'd do it again." In a sunlit garden in North London, months later, Edward sat surrounded by flowers and silence. A familiar voice called out, "Still writing in longhand, old man?" Marcus Chen, now a mentor himself, dropped a fresh notepad on the table. "Thought you'd need a refill." Edward smiled, lifting a pen. "Can't teach an old dog." "To stop telling stories," Marcus finished. They sat together, drinking tea, letting the warmth settle in. Across the yard, Olivia played with her daughter, Edward's granddaughter. Her laughter floated through the air like music. Jason arrived, late, carrying a stack of film reels. "New restoration prints," he said, handing them over. "Your whole catalog, every student film, every scrap." Edward opened the box with reverence. Blood in Camden, the deepest red. Hollow Grace, time-trapped dreams given form again. Jason said, "You didn't vanish, Hayes. You just waited. And now the world's finally ready." Edward stood, the sun catching his silvered hair. "Then let's give them something worth remembering." They all raised glasses, wine, water, juice, whatever they held, and they toasted not just a film, but a resurrection, a reckoning, a second chance. Spring arrived with a quiet promise. In the soft light of a Camden morning, the world outside Edward Hayes's window seemed to breathe easier. the leaves trembling on the branches like pages waiting to be turned. Time, once a thief, now felt like a companion, slower, more generous. He no longer counted the hours. He counted the moments. The past few months had moved with a rhythm unlike anything Edward had known. After the whirlwind of the Brighton job's success, festival circuits, award buzz, red carpet nights, things had settled into something softer, something more human. He no longer woke up wondering if he still mattered. He knew he did, but, more importantly, he no longer needed to. His morning ritual was simpler now. No rush to email. No calls from agents. Just the scrape of his fountain pen, the rustle of paper, and the clink of Olivia's coffee mug on the kitchen counter behind him. "Still working on that follow-up?" she asked one morning, watching him from the doorway. Edward glanced at the messy notes in front of him. "Trying," she smiled. "How's it going?" He chuckled. "Like teaching a cat to play chess. Beautiful in theory, claw marks in reality." Olivia crossed to the table and sat beside him. Her hair was tied up messily, traces of sleep still in her voice. "You know you don't have to top it, right? You already did the thing." "I know, but it's not about topping it. It's about finishing something else, something personal." She leaned forward. "Want to share it?" Edward hesitated, then nodded. He handed over a few handwritten pages. Olivia read silently for a while, then her lips parted. "This is about Mom." Edward nodded. "And you. And me. And everything I never had the courage to write before." The piece was titled Ghost Light, a quiet, introspective script about a father and daughter reconciling on the empty stage of an abandoned theater. There were no chases, no dramatic monologues, just conversations, honest, awkward, slowly healing. Olivia touched the corner of the page. "It's beautiful. Think anyone would want to make it?" She smiled. "I don't care. I want to make it." Edward blinked. "You?" She nodded. "I've been directing second unit on some docu-series. Quiet work, but it's given me the itch. And this feels like something we should do together." His eyes moistened. "I'd like that." They didn't hug, not yet, but something old and aching inside both of them began to dissolve. Meanwhile, the Brighton job rode its momentum into awards season. Jason Statham received his first Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. Edward Hayes received 2, Best Director and Best Original Screenplay. Olivia was listed as producer, her name etched in history alongside them. It was surreal. The industry couldn't stop talking about the Hayes Renaissance. Film schools added his films to their syllabi. Even Blood in Camden, his long-lost student project, was remastered and screened at the British Film Institute to a sold-out crowd. There was one unexpected attendee at that screening, Sarah Winters. She approached Edward after the lights came, up, her eyes tired but sincere. "Edward," she said, offering her hand. He shook it, unsure how to feel. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I owed you more than silence. I've been watching everything. The interviews, the reviews. You were right. You always were. We failed you." Edward took a breath. "You did what you thought was necessary." "It wasn't," she replied softly. "It was convenient. You were difficult, yes, but you were also brilliant. I should have fought harder." He didn't respond right away. Then, "It's in the past." "No," she said. "It's in the future, too. I'm stepping down next year. I want your blessing to name one of the new film scholarships after you, for late bloomers, for people who get overlooked." Edward stared at her. Then he smiled. "You have it." A week before the Oscars, Jason invited Edward and Olivia to his villa in Tuscany. It was a quiet retreat from the chaos, a place to breathe, eat, and pretend the world wasn't about to split open with gold statues and flashing cameras. They spent the first day drinking red wine, cooking pasta, and reminiscing about lives. They might have lived. I could have been a painter, Jason confessed, swirling his wine. Or maybe a pub owner. Olivia laughed. You're far too intense for a pub owner, Jason grinned. Maybe, but the point is, I almost gave, up before I met your dad. He reminded me that story matters. Not just money, not fame. The story. And now, I want to produce more stories like that. Edward raised his glass. To future stories. They all toasted. That night, as they sat beneath a moonlit olive tree, Jason grew quiet. Then he looked at Edward and said, I've been offered a role. Big one. Biopic. Alan Turing. Edward whistled. That's heavy. Jason nodded. They want me to stretch. Really stretch. Do it, Olivia said. Only if you consult, Jason replied, looking at Edward. Help shape the script. Keep it grounded. Edward blinked. You want me to ghostwrite? Jason shook his head. No, I want you to collaborate. Edward smiled. Let's see what we can make. The Academy Awards arrived like thunder. Edward rented a tuxedo that still had a faint scent of cedar from the boutique. Olivia wore a sapphire dress her mother once owned. Jason looked every bit the star, but carried none of the arrogance. The trio walked the red carpet together. Flashbulbs popped. Questions flew. What does this mean to you, Mr. Hayes? Answered simply, It means I kept going. They won one statue, Best Original Screenplay. Edward walked up to the stage, hands trembling slightly. Olivia steadied him with a touch to the back. He stared at the golden figure, then into the audience. And he said, This isn't about validation. It's about survival. I was buried once, not by death, but by silence, by fear, by the idea that stories only matter if they're easy to sell. But stories, real stories, are messy. They're bruised, they're complicated, and they deserve to be told anyway. The crowd stood. He held the statue up, not as a trophy, but as a torch. In the months that followed, Ghostlight went into production, Olivia directed. Edward co-wrote and executive produced. Jason financed the project and played a small supporting role, a groundskeeper who barely spoke but whose presence grounded the story in quiet wisdom. The film was shot in an abandoned playhouse in Kent. No CGI, no soundstage, just truth and breath. On the final day of filming, Edward walked through the empty aisles and touched the armrest of each chair. He felt every heartbeat that had ever echoed through the place. Felt every version of himself that had dreamed and doubted and dared, and he cried, not out of grief, out of arrival. 2 years later, Edward Hayes taught a single seminar at the University of Edinburgh. The class was small, 15 students, all older, all second-career filmmakers. He didn't assign tests, he didn't show PowerPoints. He told stories. He listened to theirs. At the end of the course, he handed each student a page from one of his old rejected screenplays. And he said, This was once worthless. Now it's yours. Make something. Olivia continued directing. Her second film won Best Debut at Sundance. She no longer hesitated when introducing herself. I'm a filmmaker. Jason, too, shifted gears. He launched his own indie label, Statham Works, dedicated to nurturing overlooked voices. He acted less, produced more, and mentored often. The three remained bonded, not by obligation, but by choice, family by fire, by film, by faith. And Edward? Edward died peacefully at the age of 77, in his sleep, after a long evening spent laughing with Olivia and her daughter, reading the first draft of their next script. He left behind completed films, 3 produced plays, 18 unproduced screenplays, 1 handwritten journal full of advice for future storytellers, and a letter. The letter was addressed to Olivia. It read, "My dearest girl, we all vanish one day, but stories remain. Let yours be full of risk, heart, and honesty. Don't chase perfection. Chase truth. That's where the light is. Thank you for bringing me home. Love always, Dad and in cinemas, in classrooms, in streaming libraries tucked between blockbusters and documentaries, one name quietly persisted. Not loud, not shiny, just present. Edward. Haze, a ghost light in the dark, a story that would not be erased." Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.